How did you get into investment banking and why Lehman Brothers?
Okay, good point. You know, a lot of these kids work their way up through hard graft, right? They start out as Excel monkeys for a few years, working all night long. That's often a way into investment banking. It helps if you go to a good school and have contacts, obviously. But I didn't have to go through that, thankfully. I came in laterally from the rating agency, Standard & Poor's, because they valued my expertise there. I had developed good relationships with the people I was dealing with at Lehman when they rolled out these companies in front of me to rate. Yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty around Lehman at the time because of American Express divestment and what was the future going to be. But I reckoned, compared to what I was doing at the time, working for S&P in a somewhat sedate, almost academic, nothing wrong with that. This is why I'm in academics now. It's very rewarding. But I wanted something different. Lehman offered opportunities, I think, that many of which were realized. And so at the time, I jumped at the chance. And, it was very gratifying in many ways, those 15 years. But it was also very aggravating at times. And towards the end, I reckoned that after 15 years, I'd had enough of it. It won't deter you from considering careers in investment banking, but you do have to be resilient, and you do have to perform. So don't forget that. Sylvia?
You said that one of your jobs was to prepare firms for the credit rating agencies, so that they would look at their best.
Yeah.
At any moment, did you know that they were not as good as they were going to be rated?
Yeah, invariably, I confess this. Our job was to emphasize their good qualities, right, like any marketing person, and to de-emphasize or even try and cover up any deficiencies there might be. Well, what we would tell the bankers, we tried to be frank about it, right? Try to be true to our profession, that nobody's perfect. There are weaknesses here. We would always list the key strengths, but we never list the key weaknesses, right? There are weaknesses here. We have to figure out how to manage those, because ultimately the question will come up. The agencies aren't total fools, right? They understand what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long time. They are going to look at this and say, well, what about this? You know? So we need to be prepared with an answer. So I wouldn't say that we were trying to cover up everything. We were trying to prepare as well as possible for the question to be asked. And sometimes it was not asked, but very often it was.
But did you feel any pressure to, present a firm that was not a AAA, for instance, as a AAA?
We often had different views from what the bankers did. Oh, this has got to be single A. What are you saying? You know, or clearly the agencies must see this as a bankable credit, and you try to explain. I'm not sure. What about this, this, and this? So there was enormous pressure, and when the agencies came out with the decision, and it wasn't what the bankers liked, you were in the doghouse, for a long time. That occurred several times. Very bitter experience. But, it was part of doing business.
For 15 years, have you ever seen a regulator in the bank? Yes. Do they come to the bank? Do they regulate at all? It's just,
Personally, I don't recall ever seeing one. But, that doesn't mean they weren't there. I don't know. Big organization. I was on my own floor. Occasionally go down to debt capital markets or, visit the bankers on another floor. And we were supposed to be kind of segregated because we were dealing with a lot of inside information. But as to that, I can't say. That would have been dealt with out of the finance function and the treasury and so on. But I know that we had loads of compliance people and lawyers, etc., who must have been doing something, including talking to regulators. But personally, I didn't have any dealings with them.
Is there any reason why you didn't carry on your career in finance?
Well, actually, after I left Lehman Brothers, I did a bit of teaching, and then I kind of came out of retirement for a bit to work at EBRD as a credit risk analyst. And this is when Eastern Europe was going through its financial meltdown at the time. The Ukraine was looking even worse than it does now. But, yeah, I just ultimately decided that's not what I wanted to do any longer. That I had the freedom, relative freedom now, wherewithal to do something that I really enjoyed, and that's what I'm doing now. So.
Would you recommend us to?
Well, like I say, I'm not trying to deter you, but just be prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. If you have a passion for it, If it's what you want to do, if it's what you enjoy doing, that's what you should do. But try and do it ethically. Bear in mind that it is challenging. You have to be resilient. You run into wackos from time to time, huge egos, people exercising power. It's not like working in a bank branch as a teller. You know, that's not the banker as I define it. It's much more high powered than that and demanding. So, yeah, if you feel capable, by all means. But try and make a positive contribution. Don't follow Dick Folt's role model. Anything else?
First advice, like a young person like us, like we're graduating. We all enjoy space, so we might not enjoy working in a big company. What would you advise?
There's plenty of other smaller firms out there that can be more family-like, more cozy, like a private equity fund or a small hedge fund, for instance. Those could be reasonable alternatives to a big corporate monolith like Lehman, where you get kind of lost in the shuffle and you're kicked around from one banker to another. So yeah, I think there's ample opportunities to explore them. And hopefully they're making a good contribution as well, and not just cutting people's throats. Yes?
Lehman Brothers have good internal controls.
Internal controls.
Yeah.
Well, history would suggest no. Very end. But yeah, at the time I thought they had a decent credit culture. I thought the structure and process was robust. The whole commitment committee functioned. They were very exacting. You had to have an answer to practically anything you could think of, because these guys demanded answers. And yeah, I think at least in the IBD area, and remember it was fixed income that contributed most of the problems, the controls were pretty strong. But in retrospect, I mean, how the chief risk officer of Lehman at the time, when bankrupt, Madeline Antoncic, what was she doing? I keep asking myself. And yet she's now treasurer of the World Bank. So she landed on her feet somehow. She said, oh, I tried to tell them, they didn't listen to me. Who knows? So there you have it. It's a strange world, yeah? But it's the world we have. Last one?
Moving on from Lehman Brothers and the US market, can you explain as to how the impact affected UK and the EU, especially when it comes to Barclays?
Yeah.
Even though Barclays was not hard hit, they changed their strategy. There was a slight change in their strategy.
Yes.
Just explain as to how it relates, the US crisis and the EU crisis.
Yeah, well, financial services is a global industry, right? So everything is interlinked. So when a bank like Lehman goes under and subprime crises in the US, it's invariably going to have an effect. Because, you know, Europe were big investors in these markets as well. So that had a huge impact. And maybe what you're referring to also is the culture. The US investment banks were setting a standard. They began moving into the UK big time. There are very few independent UK firms like this around anymore, right? And they were transferring this culture. Bob Diamond was American, right? Or Canadian or something? North American. And he, according to the regulator, was not setting a great example for his firm either, which is why Barclays has changed management. So there's not only financial impact, there's also cultural impact, which is not necessarily always positive.